All right, welcome to today's Conquer Risk podcast. Today's topic is quite frankly, why the media is not your client's friend. We think that's an important topic, and it was brought to my attention by a good advisor in Dallas. We were having lunch, and he said, look, this is something that he does on a routine basis. Is for him, it was picking on Money Magazine, and he would buy the issue every year. It would have the best stocks to hold long term. Then do a presentation and show each of the previous several years and the fact that most of the stocks were different. The point is, if the stocks were the same every year, which they should be based on the title, the stocks wouldn't change. There's no reason for them to sell a magazine. And we think that's the basis for a good topic today. Manish, you want to talk about clickbait, a phrase that we use a lot, and we'll dive right in?
Yeah, I think if you follow me on Twitter at all, which you should, at Manish Kata. I'm no fan of the media, especially the financial media. And I shouldn't be so cruel because their job is not necessarily to educate or, frankly, even report on the news. It's to generate clicks and views to juice their ad revenue, right? And maybe I'm overly generalizing, but the point is, they have teams and teams of people that sit in a room and A/B test different links and titles and subjects and imagery to see what generates the most clicks. And that's what clickbait is. It's not necessarily providing an article that may even fit the subject line. It's about providing some way for the user to click through and get to the end result. And it doesn't matter the content of it, right?
Yeah, and would you agree that clickbait is really, it's become a more generic term. It's not just for internet clicks and links. It's really, we can use the same sort of heading from a TV or magazine perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the new age version is clickbait and driving traffic
Right.
that way. So what's the official definition? I forget, I have it somewhere here. Content whose main purpose is to attract attention to get visitors to click on a link or a particular web page, right? You're just trying to drive traffic however possible. And so one of the biggest ones that I can't stand, and we always giggle about this, and so I pulled one from CNBC. They're becoming more of the number one clickbait offender these days. And Amazon, right, or Disney or anything like that. Let's pick on Amazon. If you invested $1,000 in the IPO in 1997, you would have blank. And right now, I think it's like 1.5 million or something, and that's the subject.
Billions and billions.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a subject. And then they want you to click through, and then they have an ad and something else, and you get to the bottom. And here's why it's dangerous. Okay, so this is from the Irrelevant Investor blog, and it was through 2016. So I didn't feel like updating it, but here's the deal. So Amazon, 1997 was the IPO. The max drawdown from 1999 to 2001 was 95%, right? So you would have had to sit through that max drawdown of 95% from 97 to today.
I think it's important to think about this. You invested $100,000 in that IPO. You got $5,000.
Correct.
How happy are you?
Yeah, and how likely are you to stay in there?
Right. That's why I like converting things to dollars, because to me it just makes so much more emotional sense, and that's what people are making decisions on, is their emotions.
Well, here, so I got some more. So it declined 15% in just 3 days, 107 different times from 97 to 2016, right? The average intra-year drawdown over that period is 36%. Now, intra-year is a little deceiving, but the point is, everyone likes to pinpoint these year-to-date things. So on a year-to-date, intra-year basis, the average drawdown is 36%. Now, of course, that 95 makes but still, I mean, there's multiple occasions of bear markets within the stock. And so stocks are risky, especially single stock portfolios, if you ever had that. And that's the whole point about clickbait. Very few investors, unless they're locked into some stock options, are going to stick with something through this type of volatility. It's just not going to happen. But that's what they use to get you going. So anyway, that's what I got on that.
Well, it's interesting that Amazon is going to be one of the three components in my statement in regards to, this is actually an example for internet usage, the more traditional sense of clickbait. Motley Fool is something that do-it-yourselfers, obviously they've got a huge following. It's been a very successful website, and they're giving you stock tips and investment tips all day long. Well, in my research, I was actually started looking for some Money Magazine stuff, and I came across this 2017 reference to 3 stocks to hold for 50 years. Right? It's Amazon, Corning, and B of I, or actually it's Access Financial now. And what I thought was interesting is if these are the best 3 stocks to hold for the next 50 years, the maximum drawdown was of the 3 combined is 54%. And frankly, like Riskalyze, which a lot of our viewers and advisors we know use, all 3 are above 90. Now the S&P is only a 74 in Riskalyze. Right?
As of whatever date you
recently. Okay. Right, recently. So think about that for a second. The best 3 stocks to give a recommendation for are 90, well more risky than the S&P 500.
Yeah.
That's insane. There's not a very, very, very few people are going to hold on to that. But you know what? It sells. Right? Hey, the best 3. Here's this clearly large, successful organization. They must be smart, and I should listen to them.
And the other thing, we can bring this up in the future podcast, is the Nifty 50, where they were, pushing this on investors, how these 50 stocks will be a great core portfolio. And I want to go back and look. I guarantee, most of those aren't around. And to your point, I just want to point, something out. I use Amazon. Amazon's obviously a volatile stock. But you can go back and look at Disney, Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter. Yep. It's still, they still go through these bouts of volatility. So, anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to provide a real example of actual traditional clickbait. So, in reference to you've got another TV example, correct?
Yeah. Well, back to my CNBC. Hatred, Jim Cramer, and booyah, and slamming on buttons and red lights, and so I actually do not dislike Jim Cramer. I find him very knowledgeable. So this is not a Jim Cramer, hatred speech here. But I think what's important for advisors to understand and to make sure their clients understand is that Jim Cramer is an entertainer. He's not an investment advisor. He doesn't manage money, I don't think, anymore, maybe for his charitable trust. But his sole job...
I don't believe he is licensed any longer.
Okay. His sole job is to entertain, and that's just another version of clickbait, right? So he's come out on record to say that the best way to invest is for the investors to choose stocks, pick the right stocks, and then know when to sell. And, the average investor isn't going to probably diversify among those stocks. They're probably going to pick... the 5 or 10 stocks they know or like, and then sit through those declines. And so I think it was University of Pennsylvania, I got to double check, that did a study, and we'll include that in the show notes, where you had found this for me, the Cramer bounce, where they went back and tracked that, when he comes out and recommends a stock or talks about a stock, there's a 3% spike and sometimes up to 7% for small cap stocks over the next 12 days. And then it rescinds back to its original price. And so he does have an effect. You can't say that, you should ignore him. It's in your face. It's booyah, and it does have an effect, and it's clickbait.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, that he has an effect. And what I find even more profound is the fact that reference is in Investopedia. I mean, think about that for a second. Not that Investopedia is the world's greatest knowledge source for financial information, but for it to make it something like the Cramer bounce, to make it in there, means obviously it's clearly something that has been identified, talked about, researched, etc. So, it's just another interesting piece. And
well, here, one more thing on that. I don't. You weren't here back then, but in 2008 and 2009, I remember sending out this video of him. He was getting roasted on, I think it was Jon Stewart, where, prior to the financial crisis, he, wasn't necessarily out there talking about it and, urging people to calm down and the system will work. And Stewart was blasting him and asking him, like, how much personal responsibility do you bear? And I think his response was that, listen, entertainment is what the whole gig is about. right? And once again, I don't dislike him personally. I just think that it's a load of shit when they come out there and recommend stocks. You shouldn't be able to do that in an entertainment format, banging against whatever voice boards and making noises and stuff. It's just, I don't understand.
Yeah, well, like anything, you throw a little disclosure on there and suddenly it's okay. Oftentimes in our podcasts, what we do is I actually lay out some groundwork first. This time we wanted to do a little bit different. We've hit on a couple of these different iterations, some examples, some definitions. And now I want to put some foundation underneath this, right? When you're talking to an advisor is talking to a client, we want you to be armed, right? That's part of our process. And I think it's important to know about the Radio Act and the Fairness Doctrine. So clear back in the late 20s, right? The Radio Act was a component where the SEC was making the case and put guidelines in place, and this is in conjunction with the Fairness Doctrine that came about, and making sure that from a news perspective, everything should be fair and balanced, basically. That's the short answer, right? You need to provide both sides to a story, a political story, a news story, a financial story, whatever the case may be. And look, there are, like anything, give somebody power, things occur. In the late 50s, 60s, you suddenly end up with that being used think about the time period, right? We have communism issues. We won't go into a lot of detail there, but suddenly those rules were being used to shut people up. And so by the time you get to the 80s, right? So now we've jumped from the 20s to the 50s, 60s to the 80s. Suddenly cable companies, wait, what? That's right. Cable companies started pushing hard against this rule because they said, wait a second, we need more opportunity. We need to be able to entertain. We need to do X, Y, Z. And in 87, there was a major, not a full repeal, but a major change to the Fairness Doctrine. And suddenly you start having opportunities for news shows, etc., where you don't have to be fair and unbiased. Now, again, I'm not trying to critique and say that the Fairness Doctrine was the best thing ever and we should go back to it. But I do think it's important to understand that by the time you get to the 2000s and all the way up to 2000, 2011, when kind of the final scraps, I mean, this had been moved to a congressional issue with the Communications Act, right? So all these things have finally been removed by then, which is really not that long ago. And you have the proliferation of lots of news sources. Again, I say loosely news sources, whether it's internet, whether it's TV, whether it's magazine, where no longer is there a need or requirement to be fair and balanced news. Well,
now that we've gotten
so you got to know that up front.
Now that we've gotten past your childhood memories from the 20s, in today's world, there's something that came up on Twitter the other day where the guy posted a Facebook ad from someone who, and I shit you not, was recommending, guaranteeing, promoting 50% returns, how much money you can make, and you start digging in, they're not advisors, right? So to your point, there are no rules, and they can really say whatever they want. And so the argument was, is it up to the media? Is it up to Facebook to police that? But to hop on your point, it's all over. In today's world, it's more on social media where anyone can get on there. If you're selling a newsletter, you can get on there. You don't have to register with the SEC, and you can say whatever you want, guarantee returns, and it's dangerous. And so, there's something that advisors need to make sure their clients understand, especially when it comes to some of these. And so, do you have any advice for an advisor that says, hey, how do obviously you guys are bringing up examples, but how can I educate clients on things to look for?
Yeah, I think the first step is really, it's funny, this goes somewhat to my recommendation, which we'll touch on more in a minute, but a phrase that I think holds true, and awareness is the first step to liberation. If you understand what we are talking about and the Fairness Doctrine and these couple of things and the examples we've given, then take a different approach moving forward and watch some of these things, look at some of these things with that mindset that, you know what, is there a bias present? And if there is a bias present, take a clipping, save an article, make reference to it, because these are things that you can use to, again, educate your clients with real-time or very recent, material. Because, again, until you sort of prove or validate to your clients that, hey, and not every client is going to be this way, right? But let's face it, we all have some that spend a little too much time in front of the boob tube. And, they're watching stuff, and then they're calling you and say, well, but I heard blah, blah, blah is the best thing since sliced bread.
Well, so here's what I do. To your point, I use a tool called Nimbus, and Nimbus is a Chrome extension, and you can take a screenshot of anything right now with any tool. But what this does is it actually takes a screenshot of an entire web page. And so every month cool. I do a monthly commentary, and if I find headlines, I save it and then put it in OneNote and sort of create an index of past headlines. So anytime a question comes in about another competitor or a research company that's now saying the bull market has 20 more years left, I can always pull back. Now, you have to be organized, but the point is I can always go in there and search for this group and see maybe they said the complete opposite 4 years ago, banking on that no one is going to remember. So Nimbus is a tool I use. We just talked about this the other day because I was trying to figure out a way to screenshot an entire page. You would think that would be intuitive and easy, but screenshot by definition is just to screenshot your screen.
Correct.
And so that's a good way, to your point, to get clippings. No one really has a newspaper anymore, Jeff, so you can't really say clippings. But if you bought
a magazine, you could save it.
Yeah. In a manila folder in a file cabinet and lock it up.
Yeah. I have an extra trailer behind the rig. No, I'm kidding. No, I do think that's important because one of the things especially true with the internet is an article, they can go back and make adjustments and updates at any point, right? So to just save the link, most people haven't thought this through. If you just save the link to an article that you want to use to educate someone, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be exactly the same. There could be flaws, there could be updates, there could be any number of things.
Yeah,
you go back to use
websites,
it. Yeah, you go to use it and suddenly your material is gone. So, it is what it is. That's just another iteration. But I think along this line, we are in the investment business, so maybe you could speak to trade signals specifically, right? This is something that, again, I think there's validity in discussing.
This really needs to be another podcast, but I'm going to talk about it real quickly here.
Just briefly.
We're in an industry where there's newsletters, there's companies who for $50 a month will just send you trade signals. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with that except the fact that they're not using that on actual clients. They're just sending you the signals. There's no accountability. To me, that's no different than listening to Cramer or listening to a clickbait headline to buy your equities. And these proliferate all over our industry. You know this. You can probably go right now and pull up 10 or 15 of them that do nothing but offer advice through a trade signal or a newsletter. And it goes along those lines of the hypothetical stuff earlier. But I think this is a good sort of entire podcast to dive into some of the trade signals that we see out there.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, on that note, do you have anything else you want to add to this topic?
No. I got recommendations because I just ordered a new set.
Fire away. Go for it.
I live on the beach in Florida, and so my attire is limited to the same 6 or 7 things. So one of the things I've always wanted is shorts that you can work out in, hop on into the beach in, and then if needed, go out, whatever, to a bar or restaurant or whatnot. And Myles Apparel is a short that company I started using years ago. Not cheap, $50-$60, but these things have lasted now for 4 years. They look brand new. They're unbelievably comfortable, and you can really wear them for days on end, rather than the regular, workout shorts that you get all smelly and whatnot. So I totally highly recommend them if you're looking for sort of an everyday short, or I think they make pants now too and other stuff, but I just use them for their shorts.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. Easy enough. All right. So my recommendation is actually going to be a little different. It's a recommendation and a challenge. I do want to challenge everybody to go watch this Amazon movie. It's something that I would only do either by yourself or with a significant other friend, because the Milgram it's called The Experimenter, and it's about the Milgram study. He was a psychologist at Yale years ago. Of course, it's all about an obedience study. And there's a lot of Winona Ryder. There's a lot of big names. Jim Gaffigan. A lot of big names in this movie. But in short, what you're looking at in this movie is take the ride through the understanding of the perception. And this is how we tie this back into the media podcast. the perception that someone, in this case, wearing a lab coat, or as we could say, on TV or in a magazine, provides to the viewer. And that perception is really critical here, because when one of your clients watches TV, they see that person as a person of authority, and therefore it must be valid. Again, without taking into account the fact that this is entertainment. So watch this, and I challenge you to watch it and think about how this relates to the media piece. It's eye-opening. And by the way, I do have a psychology degree, so yeah, it's probably a little bit more interesting for me, but I definitely think it's worth a watch. It's something going to be a little bit different. So there you go. At least it's not hip-hop, bro.
Jesus Christ. All right, on that note, I'm done.
All right, adios.
All right,
peace. We're out.